A woman's body was found by police before midnight on the 25th of October 2023 in a school's gymnasium toilet. Police described the body as a woman in her early 20s and concluded her cause of death to be homicide. Police also reported serious head injuries found on the body, leading her to be unrecognizable when discovered. The next morning, the school sent an email to all students' parents, stating that the school would be closed for the rest of the week due to a critical incident, and to assure parents that no students were involved in the incident. So, what had happened? It was in May 2002 in Australia, specifically in New South Wales, that Jamie and his wife Peta welcomed their firstborn. The arrival of their daughter was a source of immense joy not only for her parents, but also for her maternal grandmother, who was immediately captivated by the little girl's beautiful blue eyes. Her warm smile radiated happiness, enchanting everyone around her. The kids had a privileged childhood setting along those idyllic coasts with their mild temperatures, where the locals knew each other well. Indeed, Jamie and Peta had earned the esteem of their community, and by extension, Lilie also became very beloved. Later, the family welcomed their second and final child, whom they named Max. Jamie worked as the water polo coach at a girls' school in the economic and business heart of Sydney. It was there that Lilie pursued her studies. Throughout her time at school, she proved to be an outgoing girl with lots of friends. Lilie was an exceptional student who enjoyed helping her peers with less academic dedication. This virtue, coupled with her good nature, won her the affection of many. As her younger brother grew up, the young girl also dedicated herself with patience and care to helping him overcome difficulties. Always brimming with energy, she was keen to learn swimming, and later, following in her father's footsteps, took up water polo, becoming an accomplished player. By the time she reached high school, she was recognized by all as one of the school's top students. Between her academic commitments and her numerous extracurricular activities, her teachers always saw her versatility and high level of achievement. These values were evident when the young girl not only joined the school's theater group, but also enrolled in dance classes. In reality, her dream was to excel in both disciplines, and she soon achieved this goal. It quickly became apparent that her performances blended dramatic expressiveness with the physical grace of dance. Knowing she possessed this talent, Lilie prepared to participate in a festival. At this event, contestants had the opportunity to showcase their skills to the public and compete in various categories ranging from theater and dance to other artistic representations. Moreover, constructive feedback from qualified judges could help them improve their standards and also promote musical sponsorship within the community. Lilie decided to perform a monologue from Macbeth, William Shakespeare's famous play, infusing it with her unique style. Instead of relying solely on dialogue and facial expression, she sought to convey the emotional journey of the main character through movement. The result was a harmonious combination that captivated the jury and earned her second place in the theatrical category. In the sporting arena, the talented young woman also earned amazing rewards, becoming the swimming champion in the under-17 category. As expected, Jamie and Peta were bursting with pride. For them, every achievement of their daughter was a cause for celebration, like in 2018, when at just 16 years old, Lilie passed her learner's driving test. Immediately, Peta and Jamie proudly shared the news on their social media. In 2020, during the high school graduation ceremony, Lilie radiated light and happiness. Intelligent, beautiful, and possessing an independent spirit, the world opened up before her. By then, she had already decided to pursue a career in the sports world and enrolled at the University of Technology, Sydney, to study for a bachelor's degree in sports business management. In early 2021, with the start of classes, she took a part-time job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. From the beginning, the work experience turned out to be much more fascinating than the young woman had anticipated. With her vibrant personality, she managed to transform the classes into a unique fun space, winning over her students' affection. Her age also played in her favor, making her closer to the group, and everyone felt as if they had known her forever. Part of Lilie's charm as a teacher was taking the time for details. For example, she wrote cards for each student, focusing on their personalities, beauty, and individual talents. It was there that Lilie met Paul, the coach and sports assistant at the school. Born in 1999 in the Netherlands, Paul was the only child of a couple with a privileged economic position. The family moved to Australia in 2015 when the father was transferred to Sydney for work reasons. Once there, Paul enrolled in St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team. Over time, after earning the respect and admiration of his peers, he was appointed captain. He also actively participated in the school community by being part of the leadership team, contributing to the planning and execution of various events. However, not all his peers had a good opinion of him. Some considered him quite arrogant, and they were bothered by the way he approached girls, as if all were willing to fall in love with him. As it later emerged in 2017, once Paul graduated from high school, the institution offered him the opportunity to become an assistant coach for the cricket and hockey teams. He accepted the offer and, at the beginning of 2018, fully took over the role. In his new role, he was attentive and enthusiastic about motivating the students. However, under circumstances that have not been clarified, Paul returned with his parents to the Netherlands. During that time, he enrolled in a master's program to complement his sports knowledge. At the end of it, he gladly accepted an invitation to rejoin the sports department at St. Andrew's School. At the start of 2020, returning to the Australian dream, Paul reconnected with a former school and hockey mate. The two young men decided to share expenses and moved into an apartment in Kensington, a suburb located in the eastern area. As part of his duties at St. Andrew AS, he was tasked with welcoming the sports teams of other coaches after their respective classes, which included being aware of their schedules. This responsibility facilitated his interaction with Lilie. In addition to his primary job, Paul joined the field hockey team at the University of New South Wales and also taught at a second institution. Despite these activities, he was quite a solitary person. Then on March 18, 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Australian Prime Minister declared a health emergency and imposed a strict quarantine. The restrictions affected all sectors, leaving Paul not only without anything to do, but also isolated from all human contact. He spent a total of 18 months in solitude in a city that, although familiar, felt somewhat foreign to him. Like many people around the world, this isolation affected his way of relating to others to some extent. By mid-September 2021, as the restrictions were lifted and things began to return to normal, Paul resumed his activities. He rapidly became an essential part of the hockey team, to the point where his image was used in promoting the games. Amid this period of openness, he had already shown a particular interest in Lilie, with intentions that clearly went beyond mere friendship. However, according to the students, she was not the only one to whom the young coach dedicated his charming efforts. In fact, some of his students viewed him as someone who inappropriately flirted with the school's teenage girls. However, these concerns were not widely known. In fact, many considered him an essential part of the team. His exceptional performance was crucial in leading them to the final of the Sydney Hockey League, even though they were defeated in that match on September 9, 2023. A few days later, Paul finally gathered the courage to ask Lilie out, and she accepted happily, unaware of any rumors about him. Their first date turned out much better than either had imagined, leading them into a passionate and swift romance. However, the intensity of their feelings did not make them overlook the importance of discretion, especially considering their work environment. Thus, they opted to keep their relationship private. Initially, Lilie kept her part of the agreement. But Paul, on the other hand, couldn't resist boasting to his students and began to hint that he was dating her. As expected, the rumor gradually spread throughout the educational center until, in the first days of October 2023, Lilie learned of his indiscretions and felt betrayed. For her, it was not a minor issue, as the way he bragged about their relationship left her exposed to criticism, leading to disappointment. The romance was just 5 weeks old, and if she couldn't trust him, she was determined to end it. She couldn't continue with someone like Paul. Despite his insistence and attempts at excuses and justifications, Lilie made it clear there was nothing more to consider. It was definitively the end of any interaction between them. In a matter of hours, Paul's hurt from the breakup turned into anger, not at himself for breaking a promise but at her for not forgiving him. Such anger led him to imagine various scenarios, all aimed at harming the young woman. He then decided to go to a hardware store and there chose what he considered the ideal weapon, a hammer. On October 25, 2023, Lilie left her house and attended her university classes as usual. In the afternoon, she went to the school for another workday with her students. Meanwhile, Paul rented a silver car and arrived at the school in this vehicle. He didn't get out, he just stayed there, waiting patiently until the activities ended. Around 7 p.m., when the water polo students left, Paul finally made his way towards the institution's gym. In his hands, he carried the hammer. Once there, he saw Lilie enter the bathroom and followed her. All his movements were recorded by the security cameras at the location. Inside the bathroom, with no witnesses, they argued. Everything happened very quickly, almost as swiftly as their brief love story had begun. Then, amidst the shouting, Paul managed to gain the upper hand and overpower Lilie. The newly purchased tool was used to end her life. He then took the girl's backpack and cell phone, and about an hour later, he left the bathroom. This sequence was captured again by the surveillance cameras. Afterward, he drove to the area known as the Gap, known for its cliffs. As he walked around for the third time, Paul was recorded by security cameras. Meanwhile, Peta and Jamie tried repeatedly to contact their daughter to no avail. Desperate, they decided to alert the police. The authorities immediately took notice of the situation and began searching for Lilie. Around 10 at night, Paul sent a text message from the young woman's phone, asking Jamie to pick her up at the school without giving further explanations. An hour later, the 24-year-old perpetrator made an anonymous call to emergency services, reporting a body in the St. Andrew's School gym and stating that the case needed investigation. After hanging up, he disposed of the hammer and Lilie's backpack in a garbage bin. He then abandoned the rented vehicle and walked to the edge of one of the cliffs, jumping and ending his own life. When the police arrived at the school, following the anonymous call just before midnight, the institution was in complete and utter silence, the opposite of its usual bustling energy. In the gym, as soon as the officers saw the silhouette on the floor, they realized their worst fears had come true. Lilie's body lay lifeless. However, due to the severe injuries she suffered, investigators were initially unable to identify her. In the course of the investigation, the officers' first task was to seize the gym's security camera footage. Next, the team traced the anonymous call. It became quite clear that whoever had made it was likely to provide more information. Some reports state that the first thing they determined was that the number belonged to Paul, and they began to call him insistently. They didn't suspect him at the moment but wanted him to share everything he knew. Unfortunately, the young man did not respond to the calls. Shortly after, the investigators were able to locate where the call had been made from. Thus, in the early hours of the morning on Thursday, October 26, 2023, the police arrived at the Gap area and cordoned off the surroundings. After patrolling and conducting thorough searches, they discovered the hammer, which was immediately considered the fatal weapon. Finally, the agents found Paul's belongings. Around 4 in the morning, the police officers requested the school authorities to suspend classes until the investigation was concluded. This measure was communicated to all parents and guardians through a text message mentioning a critical incident, naturally causing panic to set in every home in the community. 2 hours later, a second considerably more reassuring message arrived because, by then, the school's management had decided to assure that no student was involved in the incident. However, after a sleepless night, Lilie's parents received the devastating news of their daughter's cruel fate. Within minutes, the family's home was filled with neighbors and friends, all ready to offer as much support as possible in a situation no one could have ever imagined. Thanks to the gym's camera footage, the police identified Paul as the young man who had followed Lilie. From there, authorities were able to outline the nature of the relationship between the main suspect and the victim, thus identifying a motive behind the crime. However, due to the lack of clues about his whereabouts, investigators began to consider the possibility that he might have taken his own life. Regardless, boats and even a helicopter were deployed along the coastline to find him. Through a statement, the police made the main suspect's name public, indicating that the nature of the injuries made it evident that Lilie had been a victim of homicide, although it was confirmed there were no previous domestic violence incidents between her and Paul. In the early hours of the next morning, Friday, October 27, 2023, a group of workers was preparing to start their day at a construction site near the top of one of the cliffs. However, they had to interrupt their work almost before it had begun when they were startled by the macabre sight of a body floating near the rocks. They immediately informed the police, who then established a new crime scene there and also organized a rescue team to recover the body. The unfavorable weather conditions made the already complicated operation even more difficult. Finally, by noon, the Marine unit achieved its goal with the assistance of a helicopter. The media was informed that the body was of an unidentified male victim, although officers had strong suspicions about his identity. Meanwhile, the remains were transported to the Forensic Medicine Service for a mandatory autopsy. The fingerprints collected were sent to the Embassy of the Netherlands for comparison with their records, leading to the identification of the man as Paul. That same afternoon, in their first public statement, Lilie's family expressed the profound grief they were experiencing. Despite everything, they said, they were overwhelmed with immense gratitude for the community's support. Concurrently, given that the police investigation was ongoing, they opted to refrain from further comments. The director of the school also shared warm words of thanks to everyone for the love and support provided during these difficult times. She mentioned that Lilie had always displayed qualities that made her unforgettable. Beyond the pain of loss, it was hard to overlook the fact that the tragedy occurred in a space where minors should feel protected. Aware of this, the school sent a letter to parents assuring them that, in the words of the police, the crime was unforeseeable. In response to the events, access to the gym was restricted for students, while the library was transformed into a walk-in psychological counseling center for students needing specialist help to cope with the impact. Amid the case's impact, a renowned local media outlet contacted a criminal psychologist and expert in criminal cases, for an interview to help the public understand the dimensions of the occurred events. When asked about his impression of the facts, he stated that the victim's actions were typical of men with fragile egos, incapable of accepting rejection. However, he viewed the young man's relationship not merely as one of anger or hurt, but as malicious. He highlighted that there was no spontaneity, but a clear intention to harm, something that, in his opinion, was evident from the cruelty with which Paul sent messages pretending to be Lilie, asking to be picked up when the young woman was already deceased. Overall, for the expert, Paul's was a narcissistic profile with psychopathic tendencies. Paul's parents decided not to repatriate their son's remains to their home country. Instead, they opted to cremate him and scatter his ashes on a Sydney beach. Lilie's funeral took place on November 17, 2023. The more than 500 attendees were asked to wear bright colors and bring flowers, as Lilie would have liked. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the day was when Jamie spoke heartfelt words for his beloved daughter and to all those who had gathered in her name. Although it took Lilie's grandmother some time to express her feelings, she eventually encapsulated her thoughts about her granddaughter magnificently. She said Lilie's brief life was enough to make a difference in many lives. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime until our next episode. Good night.
Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The story of Alison Bonilla. On September 27, 2020, police and several neighbors from the Florencio del Castillo community were attempting to locate a young woman named Alison Bonilla, who had been missing for more than 5 months. They headed to an illegal dump located in San Jeronimo de Caxia in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. The first thing they spotted was a sock and a shoe, inside of which was a nail. Yendri, Alison's mother, instantly identified the clothing and even recognized the nail. Due to the nail polish color that had been applied at her nail salon, they're failing to find any more remains of the young woman. The search party withdrew, disheartened, but not defeated. The next day, they returned to the area and ventured down to a nearby coffee plantation, located 93 meters deep into the illegal dumping ground. What they found left them completely stunned. Buried beneath the soil, moss and weeds were skeletal remains of the young woman, including vertebrae, ribs, parts of her upper limbs, pelvic bones, and a femur connected by cartilage. 8 meters from that site, they discovered a piece of fabric belonging to the pants Alison was wearing the day she disappeared. A little further away, they found a second shoe and part of an arm. It appeared that the mysterious neighbor who had provided this information had not lied. The event had been as horrific as he had described. But how did all this happen? Alison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in the city of Cartago, Costa Rica. When she was very young, her parents divorced, and she went to live with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. They moved to the Florencio del Castillo community in the town of Ujares. Despite her family's modest economic standing, Alison never lacked for anything. Growing up in a nurturing environment led her to become a highly sociable, friendly, and attentive young woman. Everyone who knew her adored her. She had an especially close relationship with her mother. They were like friends. Allison would even sometimes help her mother at her nail salon. At 18 years old, Allison led a quiet life. She attended night classes at a school which was several kilometers away from her home. In her town, it was common for young people to attend schools far from their communities, so walking through the streets was a routine part of her day. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend Harold Segura. Her days typically consisted of going from school to her boyfriend's house or meeting up with friends and family. However, this routine was shattered on March 4, 2020. At 5 p.m., Allison left her home wearing blue jeans, a white and mustard-colored blouse, and light-colored sneakers. She took a collective bus to go to the school and traveled the 5.5 kilometers to the institution with a friend. She arrived around 6 p.m. Only she said goodbye to her friend and decided to visit her aunt who lived nearby. She arrived at her aunt's house, but no one was home. She then went to her boyfriend's house, where she met his mother, and they chatted for a while. Eventually, Harold arrived, and they spent the rest of the afternoon together until he had to leave for an errand. Seeing that it was getting dark, Allison thought it would be best to leave as soon as possible and did not wait for her boyfriend to return to say goodbye. At 8 o'clock, Allison walked to the bus stop that would take her home to Florencio del Castillo. 10 minutes after boarding the bus, she received a text message from Harold, who was extremely worried. He told her it would have been better if she had waited for him to accompany her home. 40 minutes later, Allison got off at the bus stop closest to her home, but she still had a long distance to walk. The street was deserted, and the only light came from a few streetlights. Feeling somewhat anxious, Allison began the 1.6-kilometer walk to her home. She sent a message to her mother, Yendri, asking her to meet at a bridge 500 meters away from their house as they usually did. While walking, Allison noticed two men who appeared suspicious. They were heading in the same direction as her, so she quickened her pace and texted Harold, saying, "I was on the bus and just got off, and these two sketchy guys got off as well and are walking behind me. I'm going to speed up because I'm scared." Concerned, Harold advised her to take a taxi and promised to pay for it, but Allison declined. She texted him that she was close to the bridge where she was supposed to meet her mother. The men began to walk faster as if trying to catch up with her. When Yendri arrived at the meeting point, there was no sign of Allison. She repeatedly called her daughter's phone, but got no answer. Distraught, Yendri returned home, hoping that Allison might have taken an alternate route and had already arrived. Upon reaching home, she found it empty. The last time Allison had been online was at 8:40 p.m. Yendri tried to contact her again, but the messages went unanswered. The next day, she officially reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. The authorities began searching for clues to Allison's whereabouts. The first lead was security footage from a camera near the bridge where Allison was supposed to meet her mother. The tape showed her walking down the street toward her home, 8:47 p.m., at some point quickening her pace before disappearing into the darkness. There were no further traces of her after that. The following day, the Judicial Investigation Organization and the Ministry of Public Security joined the search. They examined various places close to the locality, including a lake and a nearby hydroelectric dam. The case drew the attention of the community, who decided to assist the authorities in the search. While investigating the streets near Allison's home, they discovered an object that caught their attention: a pair of plasters lying on the ground. This development was strange because the police had already searched the same area on the first day and found no trace of Allison. Someone seemed to be attempting to mislead them. On March 11th, a local resident came to the police station to share something suspicious he had seen on the day of Allison's disappearance. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighbor observed Allison walking briskly down the street near the bridge. A wine-colored BMW was parked nearby and started to follow her, gradually increasing its speed before stopping in front of her. Allison spoke for a few seconds with the person inside the car and then got in. The car then sped away at high speed. Upon hearing the neighbor's account, the police took immediate action to locate the vehicle. They searched all the houses near Allison's residence. On March 25th, they found the car in one of these homes. On March 29th, the Judicial Investigation Organization announced that they had seized the car for DNA testing. They also revealed that an investigation was underway against the car's owner, a man named Nelson Sanchez Urena. The 28-year-old man was known in the neighborhood for being extremely reclusive. He hardly spoke to anyone, and when he did, he was not friendly. Locals said he came from a somewhat strange family about which not much was known. One even speculated that he was involved with regional gangs. While the police continued to gather evidence to warrant the arrest of Sanchez Urena, now the prime suspect in Allison's disappearance, another significant event occurred. On April 4th, an employee of a store near the area found Allison's identification card. This was the second item belonging to Allison that had mysteriously appeared. The search continued, with authorities believing they were getting closer to discovering Allison's whereabouts. On April 17th, the police confirmed that they had found significant clues related to Allison's disappearance in the seized car, although they did not disclose any further details. On May 1st, the Costa Rican Red Cross joined the search efforts for Allison. Despite more people joining the search team, her body still remained missing. In the following months, the police focused on investigating the prime suspect and gathering enough evidence to charge him. Finally, on September 2nd, the Judicial Investigation Organization ordered the arrest of Sanchez Urena. He was formally arrested that same day without resistance. 24 hours later, authorities revealed that they had found traces of blood in the trunk, the car that had been seized over 5 months ago. These traces were matched with DNA samples from Allison Bomia's family. The results confirmed that there was no doubt that Sanchez Urena had attacked the young woman inside his car. Realizing that there was no turning back, Sanchez Urena decided it was time to confess his crime. He requested a meeting with his lawyer to reconstruct the events for the police. On March 4, 2020, Sanchez Urena was driving his car when he saw Allison walking quickly down the street. He offered her a ride home, claiming it was late and that 2 nearby strangers looked suspicious. Trusting him, Allison got into the car, but once inside, Sanchez Urena attacked her and forced her into the trunk of the vehicle. He then took her to a coffee plantation. Once there, he forced her out of the car and took her about 140 meters from the entrance of the property, where no one could hear them. After reaching the secluded spot, he struck her, causing an injury that left her unconscious. Blood splattered on the ground as he proceeded to assault her. After completing the horrific act, he walked back to where he had left his car, put Allison's body in the front seat, and tied her hands with a piece of cloth and adhesive tape. He then placed her back in the trunk of the car. Next, Sanchez Urena drove to an illegal dumping ground and took Allison, who was still unconscious, out of the trunk. Without hesitation, he threw the body into a coffee plantation approximately 450 meters deep to ensure that she would remain there undetected. The police subsequently ordered 6 months of preventive detention for the main suspect. That same day, they went to the illegal dumping ground to search for Allison's body. Dozens of volunteers who had been following the case on TV and were devastated by the news of her loss joined the search. On September 27, a sock and a shoe were found, which Allison's mother, Yendri, identified as belonging to her daughter. Inside the shoe was a nail that the mother instantly recognized. as she had painted it in her salon just days before her daughter's disappearance. The following day, a team of rescuers descended into a coffee plantation near the illegal dumping ground. Using safety ropes and specialized mountaineering equipment, they reached a depth of 93 meters where they found vertebrae, ribs, parts of the upper limbs, pelvis, and a femur connected by cartilage. These remains were covered in undergrowth, soil, and moss, some even fused to the ground. 8 meters from the previous site, a piece of fabric was found, belonging to the pants Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared. A second shoe and small bone fragments, which appeared to be part of an arm, were also discovered. They were unable to locate the young woman's skull. It may have rolled out of sight due to its shape. The remains were taken to a laboratory to verify if they match Allison's DNA. Forensic experts found that the body had fractures in the thoracic spine and ribs, which were consistent with the injuries caused by the fall, as described by the suspect. This indicated that they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Although Yendri, Allison's mother, was utterly devastated by the loss of her daughter, she found some solace in knowing that Sanchez Urena would spend the rest of his life in jail. During a press conference, Yendri's lawyers stated that they would do everything possible to ensure the murderer faced the full extent of the law, serving as many years in prison as possible. While they couldn't bring Allison back to life, they could seek justice on her behalf. As they awaited the start of the legal process, Allison's family held a funeral. On March 1, 2021, Sanchez was officially charged with homicide. On April 30, the criminal court ordered his trial and extended his pretrial detention by another 4 months to prevent any escape attempts. While the case had made significant progress, the most challenging part remained, gathering enough evidence to prove the act was premeditated. Yendri testified that Sanchez Urena had previous encounters with Allison. On one occasion, Allison had gone to pick up her cousins from the bus stop and met the suspect. The man offered them a ride home, which they accepted despite the awkward silence during the trip. Days later, Allison received a message on Facebook from Sanchez Urena, asking if she disliked him. Allison replied that she didn't, as they had never spoken, and she didn't know him well enough to form an opinion. The man tersely acknowledged her response. This demonstrated a long-term obsession with Allison, as he even claimed to be deeply in love with her and envious of those she spent time with. However, during the trial, the defendant completely changed his version of events. He claimed innocence and said his previous statements were made under police pressure and torture. Nevertheless, there was no turning back. The body was found where he initially indicated, and DNA evidence in the car directly implicated him. Allison's family provided their testimony in a separate room, as they did not want to face the attacker. Despite this, Sanchez Urena continued to plead innocent. On the morning of August 18, 2021, he was officially sentenced to 18 years in prison for simple homicide. He was acquitted of the abuse charge due to the state in which Allison's body was found, making it impossible to prove. The family was dissatisfied with the sentence, calling for up to 35 years in prison, which is customary in such cases. The verdict was later annulled by the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and the case was reopened to determine if the crime involved premeditation. In November 2021, the appeals court rejected the family's claims and upheld the original sentence. As of today, the case remains open, and Allison's family is pushing for the crime to be reclassified as aggravated homicide and for a review of the sentence. Yendri, Allison's mother, has not only had to cope with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with cyberbullying. Dozens of people found her Facebook profile and posted messages on her wall, blaming her for Allison's death because she had allowed her daughter to walk alone at night. Local residents came forward in various meetings to say that it's entirely normal for young people in the region to walk long distances from bus stops to their homes. Allison's boyfriend has given several interviews, expressing his outrage over what happened. He mentioned that Allison had many dreams and goals, which Sanchez Urena took away from her. Despite this, he felt grateful for the 1 year and 10 months he had spent with her, stating that she will always be his angel and the best life partner he could have ever had. Although the investigation has technically closed, several questions remain. The family's lawyer has pointed out that it is quite strange for Sanchez Urena to have moved Allison's body to the bottom of a landfill without any help. There is also the mystery of who the men were who had been pursuing Allison on the day of her disappearance, which prompted her to get into the car of her former neighbor. After an audio message that Allison sent her boyfriend went viral, the public has one burning question. Did these two men have anything to do with Sanchez Urena's sinister plan? And if not, why were they following the young woman late at night? The trial concluded too quickly, leaving the family dissatisfied with the sentence. They hope that, in the future, such cases will receive the necessary attention so that all those involved face the appropriate penalties. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your time and for being part of this community. If you haven't subscribed yet, I cordially invite you to do so. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. Good night. The horrible case of Peter Porco. Peter Porco and Joan Balzano met in college in the 70s, where he was training to become a lawyer, and she was focusing on studying to become a children's speech pathologist. The young couple was very much in love and decided to start a life together. They married in 1974, and since then, they had settled in a house in Del Mar, within Albany County, where they lived for the rest of their lives. Years later, the Porco family grew with the arrival of their first son, Jonathan, in 1981, and 2 years later, in 1983, their second and last son, Christopher, was born. Peter dedicated much of his career to being a prosecutor, but in his later years, when his sons had reached adulthood, he opted for a job that would allow him to be more relaxed and enjoy free time with his wife. Later on, when his eldest son graduated as a sailor and was stationed at the base assigned to him in South Carolina, and the younger Christopher moved to the University of Rochester campus, where he studied biomedical engineering, Peter left the prosecutor's office to start working within the Court of Appeals. By the year 2000, the Porco's place was empty, yet the family never lost contact with each other, especially Christopher, who visited them more regularly because the distance allowed it. However, by the end of 2004, their relationship began to go through a rough patch when Peter and Joan discovered that Christopher was not fully committed to his studies. His grades were not good, he hardly ever attended classes, and he constantly spent time partying with his campus friends. The news disappointed his parents, and as a result, a long argument broke out among them. A week later, in the early hours of November 15, 2004, someone broke into the Porco's house, and the discussion between Peter, Joan, and Christopher was concluded forever. The clock hands pointed to 9 in the morning, marking the time Peter was supposed to go to work. An important day awaited him and his colleagues at the court. Minutes passed, but Peter did not come through the door. His boss began to worry, as it was not common for him to miss work. But if he had reasons to do so, he always notified in advance. Something was wrong, and they had to find out. They called him repeatedly by phone, but in vain. Peter did not answer. Then, his supervisor sent a court security officer to check that everything was all right at the Peter's house. The officer arrived at the place around 11 in the morning. From the outside, he could see that something was not right. The key that would open the front door was placed on the outside, but it also had a peculiar detail. It was stained with blood. Without hesitation, he called the supervisor and reported the situation. Both knew something was not right. The supervisor ordered him to enter the house in search of a concrete answer, but first he warned him to be cautious, as he did not know what he might find. Just a few steps down the entrance hallway, the officer discovered that he was inside a crime scene. The house was in disarray, and there was no corner that was not stained with blood. A massacre had occurred there. The officer reported the discovery to the police authorities, and they arrived at the scene immediately, launching a large operation at the Porco family home. The police found the place exactly as had been described in the phone call by the informant, following the bloodstains that led them to the main bedroom, where they discovered an even worse scene. On the matrimonial bed lay Joan, Peter's wife, who had also sustained severe injuries from the attacker, with the axe used as a weapon beside her. The scene was dreadful, drenched in blood, and Joan was horrifically disfigured, yet astonishingly, she was alive. Alerting the authorities with a raised hand, the paramedics swiftly transported her to the nearest hospital, despite her slim chances of survival. Her injuries were severe. Her skull was fractured, exposing her brain. Her jaw was shattered, and she had lost an eye, rendering her survival nearly impossible. In the ambulance, a case investigator seized the opportunity to question her. Aware of her surroundings yet unable to speak, Joan communicated through head movements. When asked if she recognized the attacker, she nodded, denying Jonathan as the assailant and confirming Christopher with another nod. Her repeated affirmation left no doubt. Christopher, her son, was the attacker. The paramedics, bearing witness to this critical testimony, urged caution in further questioning to prevent jeopardizing her condition. Upon arrival at the hospital, Joan underwent a 12-hour surgery, with her survival far from assured. Meanwhile, investigators, armed with the accused's identity, embarked on a thorough search for evidence to solidify Christopher's guilt. Returning to the crime scene, they meticulously examined every detail, piecing together the sequence of the attack. Initially confused by Peter's body's location near the kitchen on the ground floor, they were astounded by the autopsy results. Peter and his wife were attacked while sleeping, but surprisingly he had survived the initial assault of at least 16 axe wounds, as the injuries did not immediately end his life. Remarkably, on the morning of November 15th, around 5:30 a.m., Peter woke up as if it were any ordinary day, unaware of the gravity of his condition. He proceeded with his morning routine, washing his face and preparing breakfast and lunch for work, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded in his home. He wrote a check to cover the fines that his son Christopher had accumulated due to his reckless driving, and went out to the porch of his house to look for the newspaper. He noticed that the door had closed behind him, and he was locked out. Subsequently, he looked for the key he hid among the plants, re-entered the house, and collapsed. His body could no longer withstand it, so he lay down beside the kitchen. Every step, every movement Peter made that morning left large bloodstains, but he was not aware of it. The investigators learned from the autopsy that the axe had caused wounds in the superficial area of the brain, but not in the internal part, where people store activities they frequently do, explaining why he moved normally that morning. On the other hand, the police authorities discovered that the entry had not been forced and that the key they had found on the door was the one Peter had used to re-enter the house, not the attacker. Moreover, the person they were looking for knew the security alarm code that monitored the house, but had taken the trouble to destroy the device. The house was in disarray, drawers open and belongings scattered everywhere, but nothing of value was missing. It was evident that the criminal had staged the scene to simulate a robbery with a fatal outcome. This theory was confirmed when they discovered that a protective metal mesh covering one of the windows from the outside was broken. Trying to open it, they noticed it was locked from the inside and only opened a few inches, making it impossible for a person to escape through there. The attacker had managed to flee the scene without leaving a single footprint or any trace of their DNA, but was not smart enough to hide their macabre plan. It was clear that their only goal was to murder the couple, and then it was time for the investigators to prove why. While Joan fought for her life in the hospital, the police authorities met with Christopher after he contacted them to inquire about what had happened to his parents. It turned out that the youngest son had received a call from a journalist who wanted information about the case, which is why Christopher called the police to know the truth. When they finally informed him that someone had broken into his parents' house, killed Peter, and injured Joan, Christopher showed no reaction. At no point did he seem overwhelmed by the severity of the situation. This caught the investigators' attention, but they had to remain calm and agreed to meet at the hospital where Joan was recovering. There, they had a 6-hour talk in which Christopher claimed that on the night of the crime, he had fallen asleep in a common area on campus. During his statement, a patrol went to the university where the 21-year-old studied, and the officers spoke with his peers, and what they told them did not help at all in proving his innocence. His peers described him as a friendly and humble guy, even though they knew Christopher belonged to a wealthy family that could afford great luxuries. He never acted superior to others. The police were alerted by these statements, as they knew the Porco family had a good socio-economic status, but they were far from being rich. They then understood that the young man had been lying to his friends all this time. On the other hand, the young students assured that they had seen Christopher on the afternoon of November 14th, in the common area where they gathered to watch television, and also in the morning of the 15th, but he had not been there during the night by any means. Everything began to indicate that Christopher was the only suspect, but then, 3 weeks after the incident, Joan woke up from the medically induced coma she had been in, and the investigation took an unexpected turn. The crime survivor was notified about the accusation she had made against her son, minutes before being admitted to the hospital. At that moment, Joan denied what the investigators were informing her. She said it was impossible that she had made such an accusation. She didn't remember anything from that day, and it was impossible that Christopher would attack them in that way. When she regained consciousness, Joan suffered from short-term memory loss, perhaps due to the trauma she had experienced, or maybe she just wanted to defend her son. The truth was that as soon as she denied Christopher being responsible for killing her husband, the investigation abruptly regressed. Thus, the progress they had made until then was paused for a moment. The authorities were forced to consider other possible lines of investigation that did not involve Christopher, so they decided to turn the search towards Peter's job. Since the man worked in the Court of Appeals, where family cases were usually presented as part of his job, some time ago, Peter had denied a man custody of his children. The violent reaction of that individual was accompanied by murder threats directed at Peter, which numerous witnesses were able to testify. The investigators pursued this theory and met with the possible suspect. However, it turned out to be a waste of time, as the man had a solid alibi. The agents returned to Theory 1. No one knew where Christopher had been on the night of November 15th. They then reviewed the timeline in which the house alarm had been deactivated, marked around 12:15 in the morning. At that same moment, the telephone lines had been cut. Then they knew they were back in operation around 5 in the morning. Furthermore, they accessed Peter's private information, specifically his email. What they found there were clues that brought them closer to their main suspect. Once again, everything led to Christopher. A week before the murder, Peter sent an email to Christopher, informing him that he had learned from his bank that he had taken out a $31,000 loan without his authorization. The man expressed his anger and disappointment in that message for having lied to him, and warned him that if it happened again, he would have to report him. Subsequently, he clarified to his son that Joan, his mother, was worried about his actions, wanted to see him, and that whatever happened, they could solve it. The investigators had found a compelling motive for Christopher to decide to end his parents' lives, but now it was time to find concrete evidence. They went once again to the university and requested access to the security cameras, and that's how they saw the footage capturing the yellow Jeep, which belonged to the suspect, leaving the campus on the night of the 14th, around 10:30 p.m. According to the agent's calculations, if Christopher had driven on the highway, he had enough time to reach his parents' house by 2 a.m. They needed to prove that he was driving the vehicle, so they approached the toll booths on the highway that connected the university to the house in Delmar. The employees assured they had seen a yellow Jeep that night. They remembered it because it was speeding. One of the witnesses said it was a young white male, but still, a piece of evidence was missing to effectively prove it. Then, the investigators embarked on a meticulous job. They knew that those who passed through the tolls received a ticket, which they then had to present at the next one to be charged the corresponding rate. These tickets were stored in boxes by the employees, who always operated with gloves. They requested the box containing all the tickets collected that day and sent them to be analyzed, one by one, in a laboratory in order to obtain Christopher's DNA from one of them. And so it happened. One of the tickets had been handled by the boy. Everything fit perfectly. They finally had what they needed to arrest him. It took the authorities a year of investigation, and in that way, they managed to arrest Christopher Porco for murdering his father and attempting to do the same with his mother. To regain his freedom, he had to pay a bail of $250,000, which paradoxically, Joan Porco and her friends took care of collecting so that Christopher could return to his regular life. The young man moved in with his mother while waiting to stand trial. During this period, Joan continued insisting to the authorities to leave her son alone and raised her discontent in a public letter, which was released in the media. In it, she asked the investigators to stop pursuing her son and to focus on finding the real criminal. But after several more months, the time for the trial came. Christopher arrived at the venue accompanied by his mother, whom he was arm in arm with, and the round of statements began. The prosecution presented all the evidence positioning Christopher as the sole responsible for the atrocious crime, while the defense attempted to exonerate him by questioning certain aspects. On one hand, they wondered how it was possible that if Christopher had been the murderer, he left the house without the slightest trace of blood. On the other hand, they claimed he could never have driven to his parents' house because no young person has that much cash on hand to stop for gasoline and pay at the toll booths. This was because the opposing side knew very well that the boy had removed the electronic device for toll collection, using cash to avoid being tracked. As absurd as these arguments sounded, the jury still had to meet to determine a verdict, taking into account all the information provided by the investigators. Christopher had a financial motive. No one knew where he had been on the morning of November 15th, until the cameras captured him driving his yellow Jeep, and he was one of the few who knew the code to the house alarm. Additionally, one of the witnesses at the trial was his former boss, the owner of a veterinary clinic where Christopher had worked and where he had learned how to avoid being splattered with blood in surgery. The jury had no doubts at the time of their verdict. On August 10, 2006, Christopher Porco, the younger son of Peter and Joan, was sentenced to a total of 50 years in prison for the murder of his father and attempted murder against his mother. The image of a united family that the Porcos had portrayed throughout their lives ended in the past, with the terrible tragedy they went through at the hands of their youngest son. Christopher's criminal behavior, which they had kept silent and managed to hide for years, finally came to light on November 15, 2004. The whims of the boy, to be someone he was not, to invent a life he didn't have, and a social status he didn't belong to, led him to commit a series of crimes against his own parents. The fatal outcome didn't just happen. To sustain the lies he had told throughout his time at university, he repeatedly stole belongings from his parents and friends, which he then sold on the internet, where he ironically scammed people. When it was time to deliver the products, he didn't, and later he impersonated his brother's identity and used his account to tell buyers that Christopher had passed away. On multiple occasions, he forged Peter's signature to obtain loans from the bank, and so financed the yellow Jeep truck. When he had no way out, he decided to murder them to keep the money and assets of his parents. Even days before the act, he approached a financial investor for advice, as he would soon receive a large sum of money that he wanted to invest. The case of Peter Porco clearly shows how far a person lacking feelings but full of greed can go. It also highlighted the impeccable work of the investigators, who, even with the victim against them, used all their tools and even more to finally do justice for Peter Porco. This case still causes controversy within the community, with some believing that Christopher's conviction was fair, while others believe he was not the author of the terrible murder. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.